The connection of the Dutch at this time was very strong to this area. They are the natural settlers to our area, and the history that we've come to know, being part of the Constitution state, definitely comes from the Dutch past. Although it's pretty well unknown to the Dutch themselves, the connection is very strong. And in this film now, we hope to take you back to Amsterdam, to the island section of Amsterdam, where the Golden Real first came from, and give you a background history as its connections to this area right where we are today. Okay, I'd like you to come along with us, because on this trip, we're going to also see Sail 2000 Amsterdam Op Sail. It'll give you an opportunity to view these type of vessels in their natural glory. In many ways, the Dutch sailing barge is the backbone and the natural heritage to the Dutch themselves. Here we are in the Wester Island section of the city, and in the 1600s it was in full swing. Ships were being built and cargoes coming from the world over. This island was named Rialen Island after Jacob Rial in 1614. The same year, Adrian Block returned with his maps of the New World. From this view, in the 16th century of the captain's homes on Rialen Island, we would probably be standing on the deck of a ship. Maybe the Tiger or the Fortune, the same ships used by Adrian Block and his partner Christensen on their way to make the discoveries of the New World. Some of these discoveries and the maps Adrian Block returned with allowed the West Indies Company or House to come into being. Well, it's nice to see the children's children of our ancestors here are still partying hardy in Amsterdam. The Dutch amongst Europeans themselves are regarded as the most friendly of people, and this Tall Ships event seems to bring all of that together. It's never easy saying tot ziens to Amsterdam, but for the moment, we will be enjoying an evening harbor song and our final finale fireworks.
paradise. At least it's not for me. And if the wind is right, you can sail away and find tranquility. Oh, the canvas can do miracles. Just you wait and see. Believe me, it's not far to Never Never Land. No reason to pretend. And if the wind is right, you can find the joy of innocence again. Oh, the canvas can do miracles. Just you wait and see. Believe me. Sailing takes me away to where I've always heard it to be. Just a dream of the wind that carries me. Soon I will be free. Fantasy, it gets the best of me when I'm sailing. All caught up in the reverie. Every word is a symphony. Won't you believe me? Sailing takes me away to where I've always heard it to be. Dream of the wind to carry me. Soon I will be free. Well, it's not far back to Santa Cruz. At least it's not for me. And if the wind is right, you can sail away and find serenity. Oh, the canvas can do miracles. Just you wait and see. Then believe me. Sailing takes me away to where I've always heard it to be. Dream of the wind to carry me. Soon I will be
Hello, my name is Richard Manick. I'm the owner and operator of that Dutch sailing barge Golden Real, and I'll be your host for the New Netherlands show. Now here in Connecticut, we're kind of known as a New England state, so we really don't get an opportunity to understand our New Netherlands heritage. But really the first settlers, the first explorers to this area, especially in Connecticut, were the Dutch, or at least came out of the Netherlands. And at that time, it was the provinces. So today, we're going to give you a little idea of some of that background history and heritage. Now, the reason I arrived with my vessel back in the 80s was there a 200-year treaty of cooperation between these two nations. And back at that time, John Adams, as we know it, was there to try to procure a loan. Now, in them days, he went to France at first, but unfortunately the French didn't come up with the money. And he went to the Amsterdam, and the local bankers at that time kind of bankrolled our American Revolution. So since that time, they set up, their first diplomatic post was set up in Washington in 1782. And actually, the total national debt of the United States, as we were as the young republic, between the years 1782 and 1795 was held by these Amsterdam bankers. It's a little unknown part of our heritage that belongs also to the Netherlands. So at that time with my vessel, I arrived here as part of them celebrations. But as that went on, what interested me in particular was that this particular heritage coming out of the Netherlands and the Pilgrims and eventually a lot of what happens right here in Connecticut really comes out of that period. So there was a brochure that was produced at that time, and I'd like to right now read something for you about this particular interest, and it would be more or less considered a Dutch Thanksgiving, and we really don't look at it like they were really connected to this whole picture. But actually, the Pilgrims never really left on the Mayflower. They left on the Speedwell. And since next year is going to be the 400-year anniversary of the time that they arrived here in 1620, I'd like to share my little information with you people out there in the listening audience. I'll put on my little professor's glasses here and we'll go from there. Thank you. The Pilgrims in Holland. The fact that the first settlers in New England resided for a time in Holland is known to all Americans. It is believed, however, that several details of this sojourn with particular reference to the historical significance of Delfshaven in the connection will be of interest. The first group with their pastor, John Robbins, and others that followed arrived in Holland by way of Texel, Naarden, and Middelburg. In sundry times, this diverse manners, after a short period in Amsterdam, they proceeded to Leiden and lived there for several years in full religious liberty. The decision to seek a new home across the Atlantic was motivated by the desire to preserve the identity of the group. So you must realize at this time they were actually living in the Netherlands for almost 10 years. And why they left and what happened to them to get there, well, hopefully we'll go down that road in this particular program. But after 10 years in Leiden, they fitted out a small 90-ton vessel, the Speedwell, and made plans for their departure. On June 22nd, 1620, according to the Julius calendar in Great Britain, at the time, the entire congregation assembled at a quarry in Vorshaven and Delfshaven. Before embarking on the Speedwell, a generous contingent of Delfshaven's inhabitants were present at the quarry site to wish him a good journey before embarking, according to the chronicles of the time. The congregation knelt and listened to the words of their pastor, who commended the immigrants to God and prayed for the safe passage to the New World. The party then embarked and the anchor was hoisted. After a small volley and argues from the crew, ha-has, the immigrants to the New World. The party embarked and the anchor was hoisted. The little vessel cast off and sailed down the Maas. In Southampton, the group joined others, pilgrims from London, elsewhere in England, and transferred to the Mayflower. The voyage lasted 9 weeks before landfall was made at Cape Cod Bay. There, after a long roundabout journey, the Pilgrims established their new home. So that's pretty much common knowledge to us, that they left on the Mayflower and they ended up from England coming to America. But really the story behind that and really what happened to them before they departed, it's a pretty interesting story, and most of our history books, well, we center on the English aspect of it. But the truth is, they were in difficult times, and at this time, the only place they could really come to was the provinces. And the reason the provinces were that way is there was an 80-year war that they were involved with the Spanish or the Habsburg Empire. and many ethnic groups from all over the world, this was the only safe place they could practice their religion. Now, at that time, the Pilgrims themselves were separatists against the Church of England, so to say, and they were mostly in 2 or 3 provinces there. I believe it was Gainsborough, Scrooby, and it was really dangerous for them to be up against the Church of England and practicing their beliefs. So they were kind of forced to leave the country, and it wasn't an easy journey for them. In the case where a Dutch ship had to come and pick up the Pilgrim Fathers, and at this time in the history books it said that the captain of the Dutch ship got really nervous about them trying to board and what would happen to them if they ever got caught. But in this particular time, the women really never made it on board with them. Now, the history books will say, oh, the captain was scared and he left. But it may have been too dangerous for the men to take the women with them. If they were caught, what would have happened to them? So at that point, they sort of escape England. And when they escape, they land on the island of Texel. So what you're getting in this reading that I came up with here is kind of a window into what really happened to them before they arrived there. And when you really start to understand this 80-year war, or really what was going on in these provinces, because Holland and North Holland are just 2 of the provinces. At this particular time in history, there were 17 provinces, which today make up the Netherlands and Belgium. So these provinces were involved in this 80-year war. But in this 80-year war, there was a 12 years of truce. And during this period, this is the time when our Pilgrims' fathers were really enlightened. Now, to understand that story, Leiden is probably almost the center of the world for education in many aspects. It's a great university town. So what they were involved with in this church at that time, even though they weren't able to vote or be part of the Republic values that were going down, it was a very interesting time for formulating their values. So at least in my opinion, we look at it as they're English, but they have a very strong provincial knowledge in their background. And in Connecticut in this, which is interesting about that as well, we're called a Constitution state. And most people couldn't really tell you what that means. Now, Thomas Hooker, as we know, is an English minister. And when he arrives here in Connecticut and brings his congregation here, there's already a trading house that's established on the Connecticut River, and it's called the House of Good Hope. Now, it's pretty amazing, but when you start to look at the big picture, in many ways our Constitution is based on good hope. I mean, what was the values of what was going on within that first republic and what we would come to know as our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and many of the principles really comes out in many ways of the mother aspect of it. Now, Thomas Hooker is known is that he brings these fundamental orders, as they call them, the Connecticut Fundamental Orders. And later on, they'll base these fundamental orders as to utilizing them as to our Constitution. And this is why we're called the Constitution state. So really, what does he bring in the fundamental orders? Well, he may have been an English minister, but he too was enlightened. So many of the aspects that he would have probably been into this formula, which he calls the fundamental orders, would have probably came out of them principles that are there. I guess about now, you know, if I was sitting in one of the local establishments, they'd probably try to throw me out. But I think it's important for people to understand that we really have a strong fingerprint, a strong DNA to these original explorers and these original navigators of the time. And what's interesting about it is, obviously they're called traders, but our indigenous community, they were traders too. So when you get back to this, and the strange part about it is when we look at this, we say, oh, the Pilgrims, and we think that's the first arrival. Well, actually, in Connecticut, it's a lot different. We've really had in our river systems practically a decade of Europeans that are involved with the indigenous communities. And as traders as well, they kind of bonded in a special way. And I don't really believe that we have an opportunity to try to understand what it was like, because often when we think of the indigenous and the Europeans, it's like one side or the other. But when you need to trade and you need each other, they lived with each other. And this is what's different about our first encounters between these two groups. And the longer you sort of study this, the longer you're really involved with it, it's a DNA that really belonged to us all. In a lot of ways, what we get for our everyday lives comes out of these trading principles. Now, we think of it as countries, but back in the day, they were companies that sort of ruled the show. And many of the aspects of trade dwelt on that. For them to profit, for them to bring back things to market, this is what it was all about. I mean, of course, they raided and plundered along the way, but they had to communicate with the people wherever they went in order to get what they wanted. And in particular, in Holland, when you live there, you kind of realize the country's below sea level. So really, everything that they get, they had to bring there. So a lot of the principles of their evolution, that's what it's about. And in many aspects, they become, the golden ages. This is a period in time when a lot of the values that we carry today really come out of that. So I'm proud to say that, my journey, so to speak, with the Golden Real, it leads me down these roads. And in the past, I've done a few talk shows with the local public access station here, and I'd like to present them time to time. I've done recently one on the House of Good Hope. I have a chapter in a book to be released by SUNY Press through the American Indian Institute. And hopefully in that chapter we can give you viewers a better idea of really what went on the Connecticut River. I find it amazing that we really don't learn anything about this in our history books. Connecticut, not like New York State where they have to teach state history. Local municipalities, historians, they often emphasize what goes on a local level, but really our early roots and what happened on our river systems and the first encounters is very often overlooked. I mean, here on the Connecticut River in Old Saybrook, we had Keetotook, and that was probably established anywhere between 1611 and 1614, and that would date it almost 10 years before the Pilgrims ever arrived. And there again, the Pilgrims as we know it, they were sponsored by companies. In their case, it was the New London Company, and before that, it could have been the New Netherlands Company. So I hope you've enjoyed my little 5 minutes here left to go, and I hope you enjoyed this Thanksgiving special, so to speak, for the indigenous community as well as our background. And I hope to be able to present more of them for you. So I'd like to thank our TV station here for allowing me this time here, and we'll be bringing you more programming again. Thank you. From New Netherlands,